There are betrayals, and then there are betrayals so brutal that they changed the course of the world. And few civilizations suffered more of those stabs in the back, both literal and metaphorical, than Rome. Today, we are going to talk about some of them, the ones that not only destroyed powerful men, but also altered the fate of the greatest empire of antiquity. Because in the end, nothing brings down a civilization faster than a knife driven into its own back. Let's begin with the most famous case of all, the day Julius Caesar discovered in the worst possible way that his friends weren't really his friends. It was the year 44 BC, and Caesar was at the height of his power. He had defeated his internal enemies, conquered Gaul, allied himself with Egypt through Cleopatra, and become the most popular figure in Rome. The people adored him, the soldiers followed him blindly, but the political elite, they saw him as a growing monster, a man who was destroying the republic and concentrating in his hands more power than anyone had ever dared to before. Caesar had been named dictator for life. To many, the title sounded like the coronation of a king, and in Rome, the word king was practically an insult. That's how the conspiracy was born. 60 senators, some of them considered brothers in arms, confidants, almost family, decided Caesar had to be eliminated. The plan was set for an ordinary day in the Senate, the famous Ides of March. The dictator entered the building in his white toga embroidered with purple, imagining he would face yet another session of speeches and debates. What he did not know was that he was walking into the theater of his own execution. First came the subtle signals, a tug on his toga, a shove on his shoulder, a suspicious gesture. Then the first blade flashed. Caesar took the first stab, turned in shock, and received another and another. Within seconds, he was surrounded by daggers. More than 20 blows were struck, delivered by men who only hours earlier would have called him a friend. In the crowd of assassins, he saw a face that hurt more than any blade: Brutus, his protege, almost a son. "You too, Brutus?" Caesar is said to have uttered before collapsing at the feet of Pompey's statue, ironically, the rival he had defeated years before. When his body fell, it wasn't just a man who died. The Republic itself fell with him. The conspirators believed they were saving Rome from tyranny, but in truth, they had opened Pandora's box. The people, enraged by the assassination, turned against the senators. The power vacuum ignited a series of civil wars that ended with the birth of the empire and the rise of Augustus as the first emperor. In other words, the betrayal that killed Caesar also buried the very system those men claimed to defend. Caesar entered the Senate as dictator for life and left as an eternal myth. Betrayed, yes, but immortalized forever. If this story shows how Roman politics could be as sharp as a blade, the next proves that betrayals did not only come from within the Senate, they also came from the enemies Rome believed it had tamed. And no example is more epic and bloody than that of Arminius, the barbarian who made Rome bleed like never before. It was the year 9 AD. Rome was already a consolidated empire, used to winning on every battlefield. And on the frontier of Germania, a land of dark forests and fierce tribes, General Publius Varus believed he had everything under control. At his side was Arminius, a Germanic ally who had been raised in Rome, trained as a Roman soldier, granted Roman citizenship, and knew all the tactics and secrets of the most powerful army on earth. To the Romans, he was living proof that Rome could turn barbarians into loyal allies. Except Arminius was playing a double game. He had won Varus's trust, but in secret, he was organizing a conspiracy with the Germanic tribes. His plan was simple and diabolical: lure the Roman legions into a trap from which they could not escape. Convinced by Arminius, Varus marched with 3 full legions through a dense forest under rain and mud. It was the worst possible scenario for the Romans, who were used to fighting in open fields with space for their disciplined formations. When the legions were completely trapped among trees and narrow paths, the attack began. Barbarian war cries echoed through the woods. Heavy rain fell, the ground turned into a swamp, and from all directions came a hail of arrows and spears. The Romans tried to regroup, but there was no space to form their famous shield lines. What followed was a prolonged massacre. For days, Arminius's tribes surrounded and destroyed the Romans little by little, like wolves tearing apart trapped prey. When it was over, about 20,000 soldiers were dead. 3 entire legions had been annihilated. General Varus, unable to face the shame, committed suicide. The eagles, the sacred symbols of each legion, were captured by the barbarians. When the news reached Rome, the shock was absolute. Emperor Augustus, desperate, is said to have cried out in grief, "Varus, give me back my legions." The defeat in the Teutoburg Forest was not just a military disaster. It was a psychological wound in the heart of Rome. The empire never again dared to penetrate deep into Germania. The border was set, and the idea that Rome was invincible shattered in that swamp. Arminius was the most efficient infiltrator in history, the greatest plot twist Rome never saw coming. But betrayals did not have to come from senators or infiltrated barbarians. Sometimes they were born within the palace itself, in the heart of the imperial family. And few stories show this as tragically as that of Crispus, son of Constantine the Great. Constantine had become one of the most celebrated emperors in history. He legalized Christianity, consolidated the empire, and built a new capital, Constantinople. But behind all that glory, his family life was a minefield. His eldest son, Crispus, was the perfect heir. Young, intelligent, victorious in military campaigns, beloved of the soldiers. But in Rome, being too beloved was always dangerous. Crispus's stepmother, Fausta, changed everything. According to some accounts, she attempted to seduce the young prince. Crispus refused. Humiliated, Fausta did what villains in tragedies always do. She accused her stepson of assault. Constantine, consumed by fury and believing his wife's words, did not hesitate. He ordered the arrest of his own son. Shortly after, Crispus was brutally executed, accused of crimes he had never committed. Months later, the truth came to light. The lie was exposed, and Fausta herself was executed, probably suffocated or burned in a scalding bath. But the damage was done. The perfect heir was dead, destroyed not by barbarians, not by political enemies, but by the poisonous intrigue of the imperial palace. Rome always said, "Beware of the barbarians outside." But the real threat was inside the house, sleeping under the same roof. 3 betrayals, 3 stories, 3 blows that changed the destiny of Rome. Caesar, stabbed by his friends;
paved the way for the birth of the empire. Arminius, the infiltrated barbarian, showed that Rome could bleed. Crispus, the victim of family lies, revealed that decay came from within. The Roman Empire did not fall just because barbarians crossed its borders centuries later. It was being stabbed little by little, from within and from without, every time someone who swore loyalty chose to betray. The greatest strength of an empire is not only in its legions, but in the trust that keeps its leaders united. And when that trust is broken, not even Roman discipline can save its destiny. Rome was conquered by barbarians centuries later, but in truth, it was already destroying itself long before. And the most devastating weapon was not the sword nor the bow.